Disney villains are iconic. They're characters we grew up loving to hate. Ghibli, on the other hand, writes villains that make us question whether they're even evil at all. These two studios don't just write villains differently, they believe fundamentally different things about what evil actually is. And that changes everything, from how their stories feel to what they're really trying to say about us. But ultimately, who does villains better? And more importantly, how do they change the way we think about morality, forgiveness, and what it even means to be the bad guy? Trust me when I say that by the end of this video, you will see every one of these villains completely differently. To be fair, no one does a villain like Disney. From the first blast of theme music or swirl of green fire, you know exactly what you're getting. Their villains are externalized evil, bold, dramatic, often hilarious, and always written to be defeated. Scar's a Shakespearean-level villain whose bitterness, jealousy, and manipulative charm lead to one of the darkest moments in Disney history. His entire arc is built around corruption, power, betrayal, and when he finally falls, it's pretty cathartic. The hero reclaims the throne, justice is served, and the sun comes out. But here's what's brilliant about Scar. Notice what he never does. He never makes you question whether his perspective might have any merit. His motivations are crystal clear. His methods are unambiguously wrong, and his defeat feels inevitable because it feels right. How did you feel when Scar fell to his demise at the end? Relief, right? Justice? I mean, I know I did, that's for sure. The world was set right again. And that's exactly what Disney wants you to feel. And then there's Gaston, one of the most disturbingly realistic Disney villains. Even with his own mini-arc. He starts off as kinda comic relief, the charming douche, full of himself but pretty harmless. But the longer the film goes on, the more that charm curdles into entitlement. Gaston doesn't want to rule the world or do anything outlandish, he just believes he deserves Belle. And when she says no, his ego cannot handle it. His villain arc literally stems from rejection, his ego too fragile to deal with it. What makes Gaston so terrifying is how human he is. He's not evil from the start, I mean, kind of. He becomes evil when he loses control. That's what makes him hit differently than someone like Scar or Ursula. He's not a monster, per se. He's a guy who thinks no is a challenge. And in the real world, we see that way too often. Frollo is similar. Driven by lust and religious fanaticism, convinced he's righteous while being one of the most horrendous characters I know, he's another Disney villain that's terrifying because of how many people actually operate like that in real life. Maleficent, on the other hand, is an OG villain. Pure aesthetic evil, cursed a baby because she wasn't invited to the party. But here's what makes Maleficent fascinating from a design perspective. Her look just screams evil. Green flames, dramatic horns, that iconic silhouette. She's visual shorthand for ancient, powerful, and absolutely not to be fucked with. It kind of reminds me of the Horned King as well. What's also brilliant and kinda hilarious about her is the insane commitment to the bit. She curses a baby over a party invitation and then waits 16 years for the payoff. That is some crazy dedication to petty ass revenge. From a writing perspective, Disney villains are incredibly efficient. Scar establishes his entire arc in one song. Maleficent reveals her true nature through her design alone. These villains carry massive emotional weight with minimal screen time because they're built to be instantly recognizable archetypes. Even in Disney's more recent films, where things get a bit more subversive, like Hans or Bellwether, the idea is the same. The villain is an obstacle, they're still just someone to beat. There are a few exceptions, like John Silver from Treasure Planet, which is personally one of my favorite Disney antagonists ever, and the most Ghibli-esque villain, but antagonists like this are so extremely rare in Disney canon. And there's a reason for that. Disney's storytelling roots are obviously Western, grounded in Judeo-Christian ideas of morality, where good and evil are binary, clear, and in conflict. Evil disrupts the world, and the story ends when that evil is destroyed. It's a worldview where justice equals punishment and peace is restored by eliminating the bad guy. The thing is, Disney's approach is so important. In a world where evil can often feel abstract, systemic, or insurmountable, Disney offers something invaluable: the promise that evil can be recognized, confronted, and defeated by the hero, which is why so many people are drawn to that sort of storytelling, including me. And honestly, it works, especially for children's media. There's emotional clarity in that kind of storytelling. Kids understand it, you feel it, you want to see the villain fall. That moment of triumph is incredibly satisfying. But there's a catch. That simplicity comes at a cost. Because Disney villains, as iconic as they are, almost never change. They don't evolve, they don't reflect the protagonist's own struggles, and they rarely challenge us to see ourselves in them. They're meant to entertain and to be hated. And so the stories they live in become stories about defeating evil, not understanding. Ghibli, on the other hand, doesn't even believe in evil in the way that Disney does. In fact, many of its movies avoid the word entirely. Instead of villains, Ghibli presents antagonists as misunderstood characters. Flawed, complicated, emotionally layered characters who are in tension with others, with nature, with themselves. Take Lady Eboshi from Princess Mononoke. She's introduced as the antagonist, cutting down forests, fighting spirits, clashing with San, but she's also protecting lepers.
She's the only one who saw us as human beings.
Giving women jobs, creating a society where outcasts are treated with dignity. She's not evil. She's pragmatic, ambitious, and her beliefs evolve over time. When you're watching Princess Mononoke, you find yourself questioning whether you should even be rooting against her. Or at least I do. You know how villains seem to always be lurking? Well, so is your internet provider. That's why I use Private Internet Access, which is sponsoring today's video. They're the world's most transparent VPN with over 30 million downloads. A VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. It simply hides your IP address and encrypts your internet connection. So whether you're on public Wi-Fi like Chihiro in A Strange New World, or just browsing at home, no hackers, trackers, or shady internet providers can peek into what you're doing. And PIA does it right. They never store any of your activity or data, a policy that's been proven in court and verified by an audit from Deloitte. But here's the fun part. PIA also works with all major streaming platforms, so you can unlock content from 91 countries. Ghibli movies aren't available where you live? No problem, use PIA. And it even supports P2P file sharing. One subscription covers unlimited devices on any platform. And right now you can get an insane deal of 83% off, making it just $2.03 a month with 4 extra months free. And it's risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So click the link in my description to try PIA today and prevent the villain arc before it even begins. Now back to the video. From a pure writing standpoint, Lady Eboshi is objectively more complex than any Disney villain. She has multiple motivations, serves different functions in the story, and her character development spans the entire film. Compare that to Scar, who wants one thing: power. His motivation is crystal clear, his methods are consistent, and his character arc is a straight line from jealousy to corruption to downfall. It's kind of elegant in its simplicity. Yubaba's another great Ghibli villain. She's greedy, controlling, and legitimately terrifying at times. But she also respects deals, cares for her giant baby, and never truly acts out of malice if you really think about it. Her decisions are just calculated business moves. Her character embodies a corrupt system, not a corrupt soul. And this gets even weirder with other Ghibli antagonists. The Witch of the Waste, for example, goes from a terrifying sorceress to a confused and fragile old lady. She gets completely defeated, losing all of her power, and simply becomes a comedic device at the end. And instead of being punished for her past actions, she's taken in, cared for, given tea, and welcomed into Howl's home, the very people she tried to harm. And then there's No Face, a character that seems so villainous at first, devouring people, causing chaos, but is really just lost. No Face doesn't just turn bad, he reflects the greed around him. He really is a clean slate, someone with no face, that's easily influenced by those around him. When removed from that environment by Chihiro, he becomes gentle, helpful, even sweet. He was never really evil, simply a villain that is born from what the world brings out of him. That's the heart of Ghibli's philosophy. Evil isn't innate. People are shaped by their environment, not born bad. They become destructive when they're wounded or desperate, and they become something else when they're seen, accepted, and loved. Yubaba's twin sister Zeniba is another example of that. She's her twin, yet so much kinder of a human in the movie. This reflects a deeply different worldview, one rooted in Shinto and Buddhist traditions, where morality isn't binary but more of a spectrum, where balance matters more than victory, where stories don't revolve around punishment but around transformation. And instead of following a 3-act structure built on conflict and resolution, Ghibli's movies often follow Kishotenketsu, a 4-act narrative structure that doesn't rely on conflict at all. It's storytelling that prioritizes growth and change over victory and defeat. This approach draws from traditions that view suffering as the root of destructive behavior. The appropriate response to evil isn't punishment, it's compassion. Not because the behavior is acceptable, obviously, but because understanding its source is the only way to prevent its continuation. And this approach doesn't just make the stories more thoughtful, it makes them less predictable too. With Disney, the super evil villain is going to do evil things and try to beat the hero, but ultimately fail at the end. Whereas Ghibli's approach allows for much more nuance and complexity, which ultimately leads to a more interesting storytelling. At least I feel. The villain may be evil, they might be a friend, a rival, a parent figure, or not even a villain at all. Sometimes they're redeemed. There's a lot of different scenarios, which makes for a more intriguing watch. And these differences in philosophy create radically different storytelling. Disney's message is, here's the bad guy, beat them, be better. Ghibli's message is, here's someone in pain, understand them, be kind. And that's kind of beautiful. And this matters because villains reflect who we fear and who we blame. Disney often places that fear outside the protagonist. The bad guy is someone else, somewhere else, someone we can root against. It's comforting, but it can also oversimplify life and human behavior. Ghibli, on the other hand, forces us to sit with this discomfort. The villain might be someone the hero has to live alongside, or forgive, or become. Conflict doesn't always end with justice, sometimes it ends with compromise, or coexistence, or nothing at all. Disney's villain writing might be more of a fun approach, but in terms of teaching us what life is really like, Ghibli's movies are far and away better than Disney's. But ultimately, who creates objectively better villains? That's what you're all here for, right? Well, ironically, it's complicated. If stories should entertain, inspire, and provide emotional release, Disney villains are superior. They're more fun, more memorable, and more satisfying. If stories should challenge, complicate, and reflect reality, Ghibli villains are better. They're more realistic, more thought-provoking, and more applicable to real life. But here's what I think personally. The best stories need both approaches. Fun and evil, but complex and misunderstood. Zuko is a great example of this. A classic angry and petty villain at the beginning of the show that slowly shows the amount of layers and depth he really has. As the story unfolds, you realize he's just a hurt kid trying to find his place. His character arc from villain to hero is what makes him one of people's favorite characters of all time. Honestly, both approaches have value. Disney villains are fun, they teach us about courage, resistance, and clarity, they give us satisfying endings, and sometimes that's exactly what we need. But Ghibli villains, or rather Ghibli antagonists, give us something else, something deeper. They remind us that evil isn't always a maniacal laugh, sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's grief, sometimes it's just a different perspective. And maybe that's the real genius of both approaches. Disney teaches us to recognize when evil needs to be confronted. Ghibli teaches us to recognize when it needs to be understood. And we need both. The clarity to know when to fight and the wisdom to know when to listen. We need the courage of Disney heroes and the compassion of Ghibli characters. Maybe the real power of a villain isn't in how terrifying they are, but in what they reveal about us, about the systems we live in, about what we fear, and what we fail to understand.